Record. Recording in progress. All right, share screen. Okay, and of course, my chat disappears. Let me try to bring that up and see if I can. I might not see the chat. It's also on a different screen that I'm looking at. So if you really need me to slow down or stop, just shout at me, okay? Or you have a quick question that coffee and jokes. Yeah, okay, coffee and jokes. I like that. I can live with coffee and jokes. So a couple of things here. One is I'm in Canvas. I'm in the modules, module 1, where I put the page called Silhouettes, Scaled Figures. I said I now change it to Silhouettes, Scaled Figures, and Trees. And you'll see that there's actually a tree silhouette Illustrator file for here for you to look at. This was the demonstration from yesterday, uploaded. And so I'm recording today's demonstration. We'll just build on that, do a few more things, add some stuff and tweak some things here and there. And go over also some Photoshop, right? So I'm providing you with some silhouettes of people and some trees. That's not to say that you couldn't find some of your own. So let me show you what that tree pack that I gave you looks like. Maybe here's Illustrator. It's like a cooking show. I already have, like I mix everything together and I put it in the oven, but then I take out the finished product out of the oven because 50 minutes ago I put it in at 450 or whatever. Actually, that'd be overcooked. Probably 350 at 45 minutes. Anyway, yeah, sir. Can't overcook the manicotti. Right? It's just not good. All right, so basically, these are vectors, right? Meaning that they're sort of like these shapes that can be scaled up or down, and they have a fill to them, right? So let's talk a little bit about the fundamental difference between Illustrator and Photoshop. And what that involves is really the difference between vector graphics and raster graphics. Okay, so really quickly, I'll just sort of zoom in on one of these, and you can see, right, that this is basically just a drawn shape, right, in Illustrator. I could have drawn this in Rhino and then brought it into Illustrator and filled it in. Okay. And so it has all of these control points, right? Remember, I can always select this. And let's take a look at a little deeper at Illustrator here. Let's take a look at this toolbar. I mentioned this the other day, down at the bottom, right, where we have these 2 color swatches. Okay, and it's telling me right now, right, that for all of these shapes that make up and compose this tree, right, they're all filled in with black poche or fill color. And then for their outline or their stroke, it's set to transparent. So there's no stroke. Okay. And I can, of course, change that. First of all, if I wanted to change the background or the fill, I could make sure that this is in the foreground. I could come over to my color palettes and I could change the color, right? Now, I don't know why you would want to change it to that bright of an orange. Makes my teeth hurt, it's so colorful. But anyway, I think you get the idea, right? And I could do the same thing with the outline, right? The stroke. I could click this to make sure that it's at the foreground. And now I could actually give this, let's say, a color. I'll add magenta to it, right? You can see that it's formed this oversized outline around this thing, right? The stroke. I could also select this and change the stroke weight from 1 to something much thinner, like 0.25, right? I could go ahead and set this back to transparent or no stroke, right? And I could always flip-flop them and have just the black stroke and 0 fill. Maybe. What happened here? There we go. Sorry. No. And then flip. The flipperoo, right? Then, of course, I could change that stroke, right? And get a line drawing of this, right? So I just wanted to point this out, okay? Here we have any shape that, or what do they call an Illustrator path, right? A shape that's all sort of joined together and as one. I can always alter its fill color, and I can also alter its stroke color and stroke weight, right? In other words, the line weight, the sort of outline around it. Okay, so that's all these are. These are just silhouettes. They're just shapes. Now, what's interesting about this is that I can scale this up or down, and it's not going to pixelate because it's a vector graphic, right? In other words, it doesn't draw this in a field of a grid-like field where each dot is assigned either black, gray, or white, right? But rather it remembers the shape, and you can scale the shape up or down, and it just fills in the inside, right? And so what's nice about this is that, I can always scale vector graphics up or down and not lose any resolution or quality, right? Okay. That's as opposed to raster graphics, right? So let me just, oops, I think I just closed something here. But anyway, I was just doing a Google image search I just typed in tree silhouette in Axon or something like that. And I came up with a bunch of weird stuff here that's moderately useful. So a couple of things here. One is there's this sort of download for, like, let's say a tree silhouette that's already prepared. Let's say I really wanted to get this. It's free stock images, but it looks like they want me to maybe sign up to download it. Ugh. Download. How many different? All right. I don't like having lots of pop-ups. I mean, one thing I can always do is I can go to. You guys do this, I mean, that basically I should have access to this file because I can see it. So you can always go to developer tools and this is Safari. There's similar tools in Mozilla Firefox and what's the other one? Chrome. Let's say I go to show page resources. Let's see what happens here. And I can always go to, let's sort of look under the hood here. Let's go to the images. Ugh. Oh, there we go. Open a new tab. Yeah. Now I can right click on that and just say, let's save image to the downloads folder. Now this is a PNG file, right? So it's a bitmap. It's a raster graphic, like a JPEG, a PNG, a TIFF, a BMP file. Those are all bitmaps. I'm going to open them up in Photoshop and you can see the difference between a raster graphic, like the one I just downloaded, versus the vector graphic, like the silhouettes I gave you in Illustrator. Okay. Let me just pull this up in downloads and drag it into Photoshop so it opens. All right. So now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to zoom in, zoom in, and zoom in. You can see that basically a raster graphic, like a photograph that you would take with your camera, right, is basically just a field, a grid-like field of cells, and each cell is assigned a different color value, right? And it's basically when you zoom in like this, you just see a mosaic of different colored grid tiles, right? And as you zoom out, then you start to sort of, it starts to fool your eye into sort of seeing a larger picture, right? Sort of seeing the forest, not the trees, right? That's a pun because we're talking about trees anyway. So you can always go back and forth here between Photoshop and Illustrator, but I think it's really handy to sort of keep in mind what the difference is between, what Photoshop is good at, which is raster graphic editing, and what Illustrator is good at, which is vector graphic editing, okay? So if I took one of these shapes, and you can see there's lots of different trees. I even clustered some together to make a tree line at some point here, back in the distance. You can always take one of these, copy, and let me just open up my demonstration file from yesterday, right, and paste. Now I have this shape in here. I can go back to my layers and see I have different layers. I could always put these on a different layer or name them trees or tree one or tree background versus trees in the foreground versus trees in the middle ground. But suffice to say I have a scale issue here. That's a kind of a weird looking tree. But it's always helpful, I think, to put these next to a scale figure, the human size correctly. Now you can always use that as a sort of reference, right? So maybe this isn't a taller tree, but it does sort of spread out more, right? You can always look at the trunk. It's kind of an actually decent sized trunk right there. It's like, basically the core of this human right here is the sort of, so you always sort of look at the trees and sort of try to create a sort of relative scale or comparison. In Illustrator, I'm holding down the shift button when I move these things to try to keep the aspect ratio the same. If I just wanted to stretch this vertically, then I wouldn't hold down the shift button, and then I could do that, right? Maybe now the trunk is not so wide, but the tree is a little taller, right? And I can put this out front somewhere, deploy it somewhere. I don't want to cover the architecture too much, but let's say I want to put it back here in the background, right? Clearly we have an issue now, right, with how this thing works. One way to look at that is to take that layer and put it all the way to the back, to the bottom, right? So what I did is I drag that tree layer. I don't know if you can see this. There's layer 34. It's this one right here, right? And I just click and drag it, right? And the order that the layers are listed in here are also the order that you see the layers on, as far as like what's at the top of this sort of layers of trace paper, so to say, and what's at the very bottom of the stack, right? So now I move this down to the very bottom. You can see that the rendering underlay I actually made somewhat transparent. So I'm going to go ahead and up that transparency. So now you can see that I have a tree back here, and it's not, it doesn't look like it's floating in space, but it looks like it's behind the architecture, right? Now, if I really wanted to take that underlay and turn it down in opacity again, then what I have to do is I have to figure out a way to crop or mask out the parts of this tree that are behind the architecture, right? And get rid of them so that they're occluded from my view, right? So let's talk about that for just a moment. I'm going to show you what's called a clipping mask, right? We're going to make a mask around this tree. So basically, we're going to draw a shape around this tree. And the parts of the tree that are inside the shape will still be seen, almost like a window. And the parts that are outside of the shape that we draw will be masked out or cropped, okay? So I'm going to turn off a lot of layers here just so we can sort of see what I'm talking about in general, and I'll do something specific to the architecture, right? So I'm going to take this layer 34, my tree. I turned everything else off for the time being. I just want to show you what a clipping mask does. I'm going to draw another shape right here over this tree. I'll, change this. There we go, like that. I'll go ahead and turn it so that you can see just the outline of it, right? And turn the fill to transparent so there's no fill, okay? I'm going to go select both of these at once, right? I'm going to say Object, pull down, Clipping Mask, Make. This is not the most intuitive process, but you'll find that a lot of the things we do are in that Object pull down, in the pull down menus in Illustrator. Okay, so Clipping Mask, Make. Okay, so everything inside of that original square, this mask that we made, this clipping mask that we made, we can see, right? And everything outside won't show up. It's masked out. It's masked, or almost like masking tape, right? Like when you're painting. It's trimmed and cropped and everything else, right? So we can still double click in here, and we could always get into this group and look at this rectangle. We could always change the size of this crop, right? And crop it differently, right? Now clipping mask has changed. Double click, and we could always change this, or we could change this. See a different part of it, right? Weird, eh? All right, so I'm just going to undo that. I'm going to say clipping mask. It's already released apparently because I deleted the clipping mask I had. All right, great. So let's do this now. I'm going to turn back turn on the rest of my layers again. And I'm going to lock them, everything except for the tree layer. That way I don't accidentally screw something up here. Okay. You can see the problem I have here. I'm going to move this somewhere over here where I just see the canopy of the tree in the background somewhere, right? Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a new shape. Okay, and I'm going to use the pen tool in order to do that. But I'm going to draw a new shape in this layer, and then I'm going to use that as the clipping mask. Okay. And so hopefully you can see this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this stroke color, something bright, so we can sort of see the contrast here, so you can see what I'm drawing, or try to here. Let's see. Why do I not have any swatches? That's annoying. Hello? There we go. Oof. We'll go with red. Not my favorite color, but hey, when you have a last name like Vermilion, you got to represent color red sometimes. All right, and what I do is I have my IntelliSense on. I'm using this pen tool, right? It's called pen tool. And it looks like, sort of a fountain pen almost, right? Like something that you would dip in ink or something, like a quill, but actually it looks like a fountain pen tip. Like if you ever use those, they're so messy, that's ridiculous. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to snap and trace along the shape of the architecture here. And basically, yeah, something like that. Basically drawing that masking window, right? Where do I actually want the tree to show? And I go all the way down and close that up right there. All right. So now I have this shape that I did. It's really odd, right? But it's because it lines with the openings in the architecture here. I'm going to select that and my tree, holding down the shift button so I can select multiple things at once, click and click. Go to object, clipping mask, make. All right. And now I've cropped everything that isn't inside that shape away, right? It's still there somewhere in the background. I just don't see it. It's masked. Weird, huh? Isn't that fun though? I mean, it's really useful, right? It can get really complicated really quick as well, right? So I almost showed that to you guys when I was talking about, scaled figures back here. And then I decided against it because maybe save it for today. Maybe throw too much at you at one time. It just gums things up. But we could do the same thing with some of these scaled figures, right? So for instance, let me open up some scale figure things here. Downloads, people silhouettes, groups of people. I'll just open up all three. Let's take a look at these. These are just the silhouette packs I gave you from the other day anyway. Groups of people. Let's take a look at groups of people. Why not? People doing the wave. That's handy if you're going to watch hockey later tonight. Some kids, but they're all standing there like they're getting their picture taken or something. They're only missing like the bunny ears behind one of them or something. This looks like the meatheads or something. The white dude standing there taking a picture at Daytona Beach or something for spring break. This one's not so bad. At least it has some what looks like gender diversity here. All right, copy. There we go. Paste. All right, now, whoa, sorry, I accidentally clicked and dragged and stretched that. That would not be good. I'm gonna move these over. I'm just gonna try to make a relative sort of scale here comparison. I'm gonna hold down the shift key. See my cursor when I get close to that corner, it's gonna say, hey, do you wanna like drag this and move it and resize it? And I'm gonna go, yeah, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. I'm holding down the shift button so that it preserves the both the width and the height, the proportions, right? And I'm dragging that. Let's put these folks on the plank. Let's make them walk the plank. Yar. All right. Or no, maybe not. They blend into that tree. Let me go there. I was going to say like sort of awkwardly like crop there just so you just see their legs and feet. That's kind of weird. You know what I'm going to do? Watch this. I'm going to mirror them. I'm going to crop out that dude. That guy bugs me anyway. All right. I don't know why. So weird. Anyway, so again, I have this. I copied and pasted it in for my silhouette pack, scaled it up. I look at that layer. I'm going to turn this layer. Actually, I'm just going to leave this layer right here at the top. Okay. But I'm going to make sure that I lock all the other layers and just draw on the same layer that I have my silhouettes. I'm going to mask. Okay. So everything else is sort of locked, right? That's where these layers come in really handy. It's really easy to start accumulating like lots and lots of layers. And then you're like squinting at these little thumbnail previews of it, like which one is that one? So it's really handy if you get into the sort of habit, the good, get into the good habits of like labeling things, keeping those layers organized. You can also make layer sort of, and then make sub layers underneath it. So you can sort of keep things organized, in sort of categories, right? If I want to put all the trees and people in one category of layer, I could do that, right? I believe it's called create new sublayer, create new layer. So I could say, for instance, entourage, right? That collective name we give to, human scale figures, silhouettes, plants, cars, bicycles, birds, trees, vegetation, stuff like that, right? And then I could basically drag this and make it into a sort of, I think, anyway, a sublayer of the other, right? So I could click and drag these in. Now suddenly I can sort of, keep all the entourage in this sort of group, right? So there's that layer still. There's this layer with these silhouettes. Here's these layers with these silhouettes. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and lock everything except for this layer 1 that I have, because that's the one I'm going to crop. And I'm just going to draw a box like that. I'll go ahead and change the stroke to an outline and remove the fill so you can sort of see and compare. I already have the mask shape that I drew selected. Hold down the Shift key in my keyboard so I can not deselect this and select this, but select everything at the same time. I'll go ahead and select that silhouette as well, right? So now I have multiple things. I have the thing that I want to mask, and I have the mask shape that I want to use, both selected. You go to Object Pull Down. I'm going to use the clipping mask, make, right? Now it looks like this person slides right behind that wall, right? Now it looks like, there are almost 3 of them standing there looking at this painting that could be on the wall there or something. I don't know. Since this is a museum, maybe that's, whatever. Anyway. Okay, right? So that's how you can begin to cluster things together. And again, the more you activate these spaces with humans, the more believable it becomes, right? All right. So let's talk a little bit about what happens when you get a situation like this, where you find the perfect silhouette, but it's actually a JPEG or a PNG, and you bring it into Photoshop. How do you convert it into, let's say you want to convert it into a vector graphic. How do you do that? Or let's say you want to actually leave it as raster, but you want to cut out this white background, right? There's several different ways we can approach this, but here's the easiest way, right? We're going to talk about 2 or 3 different tools. One is various ways we can select just portions of the photo, right? So if you look at underneath this cursor, right, we have several different tools. I click and hold this out. There's a lasso tool, polygonal lasso tool, magnetic lasso tool. Then there's also object selection tool, quick selection tool, and magic wand tool. All right. If I try object selection, let's see what that looks like. No objects are selected. Oh, got it. Make sure layer selected. Let's see what this does. All right, so what this is trying to do is I drag a box around the trees. It's trying to find just the tree and trying to differentiate by contrast the tree versus, let's in this case, the black tree versus the white background. Okay. If I go to the magic wand tool, I'm clicking and holding, and that magic wand tool pops up. Right. What I can do is I can select areas of the image that have similar color, and I can change the tolerance, how picky I want it to be, being the same color, or how selective I want it to be or not. So just try this right now. It looks like I'm selecting everything that's contiguous, that's sort of black, right? All this part of the silhouette. I might need to, again, make sure that this is set so I can continue to add to that selection and start to select some of these other shapes in order to fill those in. If the tolerance is too tight, right, I can always go back to the magic wand tool, raise that tolerance up so I'm maybe up to something larger like 50. Now I'm selecting everything that's dark around this, but I'm not getting this gray. I'm just getting the black, right? Which is kind of handy. I don't necessarily want that shadow, right? Okay. What's interesting is that from here, let's just take a look and see what I have selected. One way I can do that is I can say Control C to copy, and then Control N to start a new file or new document in Photoshop. It's going to say, well, you have something like clipboard and the copy and paste. Would you like to make a new document that's that size exactly? And I'm going to look at this. I'm just looking at the settings. I'm going to say, yeah, I'll leave it there. But for the background, I'm going to say transparent, right? I'm going to say create. I get a transparent, new transparent Photoshop file. I can paste that into, right? So you can see now what I've done is I just copied, before I had a flattened image, right, with a black tree with a white rectangular background, right? Let's say I just want to get rid of the rectangular background. I just want that tree with no background, transparent, right? Now I could save this out as a PNG file, right? So I could say save as in Illustrator. There's lots of different ways to save files. JPEG would flatten it and put that white background on it again. In this case, I'll do PNG that preserves the alpha channel. I'll put this in, I'll put this on the desktop. This is where you can pretend to be Bob Ross and say, let's give this tree a friend. We'll call this Happy Little Tree. Probably just dated myself. You guys probably don't even know who Bob Ross was. Happy Little Tree. All right. And the world would be a better place if there were more Bob Rosses, that's for sure. Turn that viewport rectangle off. You know, in Illustrator, then I could place this PNG file. Let's see, where did I put that? Desktop. Did I save it in desktop or not? Downloads? Did I save it or not? Oh, I didn't yet. It brought up this box. Sorry. It's like putting it on the other screen for me. Yes, I'll just say, okay. Sorry, now it should save. It was like just asked me a question about how to save it really quickly, right? So just place it just like that background bitmap that we used, the rendering, the underlay, right? Now I can place this tree wherever I want. Now remember, if I scale this up, you're gonna start to see the pixelation, right? This is a PNG, it's a raster image, right? So, but I can't add that tree right there. Right? Let's say I want to turn this into a vector. There is a way to do that in Illustrator. If I have something like this where it's very binary, it's like there's black and there's white, right? This is actually a really handy tool. I can go to Object and use Image Trace. Okay, so I'm going to select this image that I imported in, this PNG file. I'm going to go to Object, Image Trace, Make. Okay, and now it's going to show me the results, but I can also go along this top here. I'm just going to sort of blow this up. You can see that I have some image trace settings that I can adjust. So trace results with outlines, tracing results, outlines with source image. And I can say high fidelity photo. All right, I'll get a little more detail. I could say it's a black and white logo. I could say, you know, you can actually use grays and whites if you need to, depending on, you know, the coloration, or just 3 colors, silhouette, right? So you can begin to play around with this and sort of understand how much detail you want and how much detail you need. I would say the detail showing on here is maybe a little less and noticeably less than the detail that we had with these other silhouettes. So I wouldn't put these with or I wouldn't put this one with these other silhouettes, but I'm just sort of showing you, right? You can do this with humans, you can do this with trees, you can do this with other things, right? But, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, you know, sort of showing a little bit of context and things like that. Now later on, we'll actually do some perspectives and renderings, some real renderings, and in Photoshop we'll actually start to do some stuff that's actually more photorealistic, right? And so we'll actually start to use brushes. We'll add the trees, but we won't necessarily use tree silhouettes. We'll use like actual photos of trees and plants and skies, and start to composite again a drawing. You'll find that there's lots of different layers that you can build up in Photoshop. And, you know, by the end of your schooling here, you won't, not by the end of the summer, but by the end of your schooling, you'll be Photoshop ninjas. It'll be awesome. But we'll give you a good base, solid base this summer, that stuff, because, you know, add the bling to the stuff, to these renderings and Axon drawings, okay? All right, so here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like for you to activate with more humans, right? Some of those, especially some of those spaces on the inside of your models, okay? As well as to think about some of these outdoor spaces, right? It's one thing just to add some trees scattered around, which I have done. I'll admit, like, there's no logic to how I've added these trees, right? So let's talk about this for just a moment. I'm still sharing my screen, right? Hopefully. Let me just try to find the menu so I can get my annotate tools up here. Sometime today, computer. Oh, here, it's over here. Where's my annotate? Here we go. All right, sorry, I want to draw a little bit here. So let's say, for instance, I was thinking about this. There's a logic to this, and it's based off of a grid, isn't it? Right? I mean, we started with squares. We divided things in inch increments, broke them up, started to deploy these things again, right? This is very much a square grid project. And so if I thought about some of these primary sort of, the way I've ordered these things, starting to actually cut through not just my architecture, but also on the ground below, right? There's a way to sort of think about how to extend these sort of ordering systems and the grid inherent with the architecture off into the landscape, and to use those, right? So for instance, right here, this bulkhead that comes down, right, and then I pass underneath, almost becomes, without being a wall or a separator, almost defines or differentiates one space, outdoor space, versus another outdoor space, right? I think so anyway. You can do the same thing with trees, right? Let's say you had a grid, right? On the ground, you could actually start to make plantings in a grid, right? And maybe call that a bosque when we sort of plant things out in a grid. Really nice and neat. Trees, they branch out and they have a canopy, la 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 la. And of course, they have a trunk and whatever. Right. Similarly, we can always think about mixing up the ground, right? We could always add a grid of, like, let's say pavers or something, or tile to this outdoor patio, right? Yeah, wouldn't be too much, right? Or to add, maybe some, a bed of stuff right here, right? So in other words, here's tile and pavers, but here we interrupt it and then we add some, agave or something, maybe some fountain grass with some, or here's some, maybe some yuccas with some of those flowered spikes that pop up this time of year, right? So we can always add sort of, vegetation, start to think about these things. Right? So what I want you to do is to not just add a few trees here or there, but to think about, well, how do you add trees in a way that complements the architecture? Okay, in a way that works with the architecture. So it looks like the same person that thought about the building also thought about the grounds around the building, right? And so, maybe it's about the approach, right? If I think about this, let's say, that this frame and this frame, right, sort of brackets some sort of, approach. Maybe I plant trees to sort of, again, talk about that sort of path, that the axis that I want to sort of lead up to here, right? Or, I mean, again, work with what you have, right? But now you're sort of analyzing what you've done and seeing what the opportunities are, right? And to see how that further informs more decision making, let's say along the outside, right? At the same time, I would say populate some of these spaces. If this is about people walking, and approaching the building, right, and that experience under these trees canopy, then populate this with groups of people walking along this path, right? Show more people along this outdoors. Show more people in some of the indoor spaces, right? And again, if you need to, mask them out so that it looks like they're really in there, okay? It doesn't hurt when you're thinking about a composition like this to have some things in the foreground, right? What I mean by the foreground is things that are closer to us. Trees, you ever see trees? Really look at trees when you go out on a walk. They're really smart. They know where the resources are and they grow to the resources, right? That's why you usually see trees, they sort of go up and then they lean out, right? And they're usually leaning to get as much photosynthesis as they can, right? So oftentimes that's to the south or away from a wall where they've been planted along one of those block walls along one of our neighborhoods, right? Anyway, it doesn't hurt to have some things in the foreground, some things in the midground, and then a few things in the background, right? Again, you're playing these tricks so that you're fooling the eye. We start to see and recognize these things because that's how we see, right? We see things that are close up. We see things in the background, right? Even if they're more peripheral. And then we see the things that are actually in the focus of our, the subject, I think, should be the architecture and the spaces indoors and outdoors around it, immediately around it. It doesn't hurt to have a few things in the foreground and a few things in the background, sort of provide that balance, right? Our eyes and brains really like that, for what it's worth. I scribbled all over this drawing enough, haven't I? let's clear that out. It's kind of embarrassing. I'm going to post this on YouTube like too. All right, so but does that make sense? What I'd like for you to do, and we'll share these first thing tomorrow, is to take the one you did for today, add some more to it, add some vegetation, add some more scale figures, okay, and then we'll put those. That'll be part of your assignment over the weekend. Will be to do all five of your axons, right? But adding entourage, adding the tone, the soft shadows, right? Really working on those line weights. Okay. I did want to go over this stuff really quickly today. So just some quick basics, right? The more we use this stuff, the more you'll learn, the more you'll sort of feel comfortable, and sort of the more we demystify, the more you can dig in on your own as well and sort of understand how to learn. I mean, part of this is learning how to learn, because these things are constantly changing and evolving, these tools. And so it's always a lifelong learning process to sort of stay on top of the latest and greatest and the newest stuff, and sort of understanding how to, sort of computational literacy, to just sort of like, not fear the software, but to sort of understand how to dive into it and figure things out. Okay. I'm here to help you with that this summer, of course, but that's also the spirit of this too, is to sort of, it's a crash course. It's a limited amount of time. I can only whet your appetite and then leave you hungry, wanting for more. Then you should continue to use these tools and develop your skills and agility with them. Okay. That's how you practice. Practice is how you really sort of gain the sort of level of skill and craft anyway. So yeah. Anywho, long story short, I want you to just spin the one that you did for today around one more time with more adjustments. That's it for the morning class. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and stop recording, and let's talk a little bit. I'll just briefly touch on and remind you guys what's happening in the afternoon, as well as tomorrow.